Okay, so this is a mini lesson on frog theory and all the essential ideas. So the first thing that we're going to define is the frog box. It's going to be computed in the following way. It is the standard deviation of the ranges of the last 30 days. So the way we compute that is we go back 30 days, and for each day we compute high minus low. That gives us the range. Okay? So that gives us a number. And then we do that for 30 days in a row, the last 30 days. So that gives us all of those 30 daily ranges. Then we rank that from max to min. So we find the biggest range and the smallest range of the last 30 days. That's useful information about our targets. And then we're going to find the average range. That's going to be important. And then we're going to find the standard deviation of that range. And that really just tells us what's the variation in the sizes of these daily ranges. So the frog box we're going to define as the standard deviation of the last 30 days of range. We're going to define that as a standard unit of measure of volatility. And we're going to use that to help us define the difference. We're going to define it as the difference between signal and noise. And what that definition means is that if price is, let's say that this was the opening, and then it sold off in the morning like a morning hook, and then started to hook back up, we would say, all right, if this were the low of the day, and 90% of the time, the high or the low of the day is formed in the first hour. So let's suppose that we had a strong bull market, and this thing has been strong, and it had a small gap down, and then sold off briefly, and then started to move up, and the rest of the market was moving up. And we're only 15 minutes into the day. So we're 15 minutes in. We might say, hypothetically, that could be the low of the day. When the day closes and we look back, we wouldn't be surprised if that low of the day made in the first 15 minutes. We wouldn't be surprised if that was actually the low of the day. So then we say, well, if that's the low of the day, how far up could this thing go? So we're going to look for the maximum reasonable intraday move. And we're going to call that the range stat. We're going to define it as the range stat or the R stat, but for short. You'll see me use that term of art a lot. The R stat. So we're going to define that with precision. The range stat is the maximum reasonable intraday move. It even sounds good. Maximum reasonable intraday move. The range stat is going to be defined as the average range of the last 30 days plus one frog box. So plus one standard deviation. Now here's why that matters. According to statistics, when you range things from the max to the min, and then you find the average, and then you compute plus or minus one standard deviation, it turns out that mathematically 1/3 of the data falls within plus or minus one standard deviation of the average, and then about 1/6 of the data falls between the edge of normal. So if we call that normal, that's 2/3, or that's 2/3, and the outside is 1/3. So we're just going to define this range as normal. And this is going to be abnormally good and abnormally bad, or abnormally large and abnormally small. So the minimum amount of move that it can have at any day is 0. So if we said this were the low of the day, and we're going to call the maximum reasonable intraday move a frog box plus the average range, this is what we would be saying. From the minimum, which is 0, we're going to go average plus 1 frog box. It takes us up this far. So any daily move that falls within this region, we're going to say is not surprising, and then only this remaining move would be classified as abnormal or surprising. So the maximum reasonable daily move is from 0 up to average plus 1 standard deviation. And that means of the past 30 days, we would have seen 5/6 of the time of the last 30 days the move was this or less. Only 1/6 of the time did it go more than average plus 1 standard deviation. So we're just going to define that as an unreasonable expectation. I'm not allowed to expect it to move something that in the past it only did it 1 day out of 6. So you could go a whole week and never see that move. That would not be unusual. So for our purposes, when we're computing the maximum reasonable intraday move in order to estimate what is reasonably available to us, we're going to use the range stat. So if it's sold off and is starting to move up and we want to go long, we could say, according to the frog theory, if it moves a frog box off the bottom, and I use that as my execution risk, or my position sizing risk in this case, it's simultaneous. When we first started doing the frog, we just said, we're going to call that my 1R. Then we could still reasonably expect to see an average range. Then that's going to be my prospective reward. So if this is my reward and that is my risk, as long as there were 2 of those to 1 of those, we had an intraday reward to risk ratio of 2 to 1. So that was our strategy. The frog box, or frog 1.0 said, if you wait 1 hour, and we're going to call that one the slow frog. The slow frog waited 1 hour. And said, after 1 hour in, look back and see what the high and the low of the day were. And if it has moved 1 frog box away from that and is still going, then you can get in and trail it with a frog box until it moves a full frog box against you. So you'd be moving up, you got in because it moved a frog box, and you trail it with a frog box, and then when it reversed a full frog box, then you would get out, and so you would capture that move in the middle. We then said sometimes we saw really big moves were happening right from the opening. And because we had to wait an hour, we were missing all of those in retrospect, which looked like easy moves right from the opening. Because the other research we did said 40% of the time, so 2 days out of 5, 2 days a week, the high or low of the day, the opening is within the top or bottom 10% of the day, 2 days out of the week. So a couple times a week you could see it open here and then just go, or open here and then just go. Well, on those days, the slow frog was not satisfying because you missed all of that early directional powerful moves. So we said, all right, well, let's go to let's call a quick frog. Let's amend this rule and say, let's just wait 30 minutes instead of 1 hour, because on those kind of days we can get in 30 minutes sooner. And there's still some reason to believe that the low of the day, well, the current low of the day is still the low of the day, but if it's already moving away from there, let's just go ahead and get it instead of waiting a full hour. So that became the quick frog. And that was preferred to the slow frog because you got in sooner and you could manage that trade pretty well. And then we said, well, let's call it the leapfrog and say, right from the opening, let's put a 1 frog box bracket on the opening, and then whichever way it broke out first, let it move a full frog box, and then trail it with a frog box, and use all of the other rules. The other rules included things like, if you had one frog box of gain, sell half, move the stop to half a frog box, and then trail with half a frog. And that actually locked in gains in a sensible way. That became the standard version 1.0, was that you got one R in hand, sell half, move the stop to a half a frog, and then trail that half a position with half a frog, and that was a micro improvement. But it felt much more satisfying. You didn't give back nearly as much. But if it just kept running, you still had a piece on, only half, but you actually got paid. And that was pretty good. The leapfrog suffered the problem of management, which said that if it opened and then you had here were your one frog box triggers. Well, if it went up and then sold off, well, this was now the high of the day, and so one frog box from here, this is where you could get in. But if it didn't, and it just kept, you had to keep monkeying around with the highs and lows of the day and adjusting the frog boxes, and it became a management challenge when you were trying to manage 10 different boxes or 10 different trades, and all these, it just impossible. So you had to put it on a robot, and it just was clumsy. So we explored that for about 3 or 4 years. And the guys who were trading it forward reported the following mechanical results. That the slow frog, or I'm sorry, the quick frog, would wait 30 minutes, get it in, and then trail it, and then do all those other things. It had about a 0.54 win rate, and the win was 3 and the loss was 2. That's a pretty good, that's an unfair coin in your favor, and you pay 3 and lose 2. So let's just call it a 50% win rate and use the extra wins to just pay the cover charge for all the, the trading administration. So if you had a coin, a fair coin, that paid 3 on a win and 2 on a loss, how often would you want to play that game? As many times as you could, every day, forever. In practice, it turns out that's hard to do when you just follow the robotic rules and you're trying, because it feels like, man, I'm getting out when I don't want to get out, it's staying longer than I want to stay, and people would start tweaking it around, and because it was so simple and boring, they found it difficult to do that. Now, the way to do that is mechanical, and let a robot trade it at a small level of risk and just reap the results. So Matt Blankenship did that, and he had something like 800 trades, and those were the numbers that came out. So he got him started, and then all he was doing was, as soon as it made 1 R, it just cashed the whole position, just be done with it. So it bought it, trailed it with a frog, and it either, whenever it hit that stop, it hit that stop, or it cashed everything at 1, and that turned out to be the numbers he was getting. And so he would divide it in. He would set up 10 frogs and had the robot trader, so that it would take the first 4, cancel the others, and then it wouldn't try to re-enter or stop and reverse or do anything. It just would do that. That's not bad. So here's what, when we studied this further, what we discovered was that when the average win was 0.6, okay? The average win was 0.6. Well, here's how you get a 0.6 win. In this mechanical frog, the way you get your average win of 0.6 is it moved off the bottom of frog box, so you got long. It went an additional 1.6 frog boxes up, and then sold back off a full frog box, and then you got to capture 0.6. So you had a 1.0 move off the bottom. It moved another 1.6, so this was a total of a 2.6 frog move off the bottom, and then you gave back 1.0. So you watched a 1.0 and a 1.0 in order to capture a 0.6. That felt wasteful. So we took a look at all the winning trades and said, how many times did this thing move and go and sell off more than 0.7? So you got long, and then it sold off and went 0.7, but didn't kick you out of the trade. So how many times did it come down in here and then turn around and go be that big winning trade? Never. Out of 800 trades, it never did that. So what we said was, well, then there's no reason that if you let it move 1.0 off the bottom, there's no reason not to put your stop at 0.7. Because now you will not sacrifice any of the wins, but you will protect against the additional 0.3 of things that just sold off all the way. So the idea of using a fraction of a frog box now became attractive. And then we said, well, let's do it this way. So you had some kind of morning hook, and off it goes. Now, instead of waiting for a full 1.0 move off the bottom to get in, with the stop at 0.7, how about we just get in